We're still short on mic, so we have this one. I'm going to get the share, pass it down, and so we'll start probably Jane, Vernon, then Dave in that order. Anyway, when we were planning this event, we were looking at, what are some issues that we really think we need to address, and how do we get that perspective out on the table and many tables across the province over the next year. So the question I want to start with, and I'll ask each one of you to try that, and it's a simple question, though it's a complex answer, I suspect. What would be a perfect day for a child leaving home and venturing into his or her new work in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador in 5 years' time? Jane.
How old?
Pick your age.
I was thinking 3. Ashraf is 3 years old. His mother, he lives with his mother, his grandmother, his older brother, and his aunt. His mother works downtown in a store, and every day at 7:30 in the morning, she takes Ashraf to the early years center. That is, they walk together because it's only 2 blocks away. It is part of the local school. When they get there, he enters into a
Ashraf crying. He doesn't want to go to school.
Yeah, we're going to have our own real life project to work on. He comes into the playroom. He has his cupboard where his coat goes, and he joins a room. There's 3 or 4 other kids already there. Educator greets him, gives him a hug, talks to his mom for a couple of minutes as Ashraf sits down and joins 2 other friends who are having a breakfast snack. He then finishes breakfast and moves towards having a look at the block center where there's a couple of other friends already there. About 8:30, it's time to go. Everybody gathers together and goes outside through the attached door right out into the playground that goes down a rolling hill. It's got lots of trees and good landscaping, mounds, lots of natural materials. There isn't a sign of red plastic in the whole place. And he proceeds to play with a whole range of kids who are there from 2-year-old to 5-year-olds out on the playground for the next hour or so. And so his day continues with a lot of good opportunities for play. He has extended time for block building. He can't stand it when he just starts building something and it's time to tidy up. The room is big enough that his block structures, he and his friends' block structures, get to last all day long and sometimes into the next day and the day after that. There are cameras nearby, and when he thinks there's something very special he'd like his mom and his grandma and his aunt to see, there's always an educator who's willing to come and take a picture, and it goes into an electronic record-keeping system for learning stories, and his mom can open it up that night at home. And I'll pass it along.
Well, I don't think I could beat that. Lucky Ashraf. Exactly. And I won't even try. I think the only thing I would add to that would be that Mom and Ashraf have decided that this is a day that they are going to go to an early learning center. It would be wonderful if parents had the choice and Ashraf had the choice. So it's there, and if you want to use it 3 days a week or 4 days a week, you can. But if you're having a day where you just want to snuggle at home with Mom and visit with your grandmother who's coming that day, then you could have a day to do that too. But the whole parent choice, it's safe, and you've got the opportunity to do what you want to do. But you did a great job on that.
Yes. The only thing I'm going to add is that at the end of Ashraf's day, when his mom goes to sleep, she is secure that he had the best possible day that he could have had, and that she doesn't fall asleep that night stressed, exhausted, full of guilt or fear, and afraid of what tomorrow will bring.
anybody want to add to that from the audience? And I have the microphone. Children is going to pass it around. Any takers? You're dealing with children every day? Yeah. Okay. And then we'll pass it
I know I'm not supposed to really be participating, but one of the things I heard when Jane and Verna and Dave were talking was it would also be nice that mom who's having some issues with Ashraf, and when she goes to pick him up, there's somebody there and she can say, I'm just having so much trouble getting Ashraf to sleep tonight. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I don't know how I can resolve that problem, that there would be somebody there in this perfect day that could support mom, especially if she's a single parent, in ways that she can better care for her child.
And that speaks to one of the comments. Beth has a question or comment that over lunch, which was around,
Well, I was just wondering, in this perfect day, you picture this early learning center to be in a school, and if so, the dynamic, the school that we know, this is a vision we're coming up with. So the school and the locations of schools plotted out in a bigger plan, would require more land, more trees. To get a tree to look out and go out into, you're going to have trees. And if you're building schools in new neighborhoods that aren't established, the tree is very skinny. It doesn't have any trees at this point to climb or do anything like that. So does the vision use the sharing of resources in terms of being in a school? Is that what you're pitching these early learning centers? Are you pitching them, Ashraf and his mom going in on her own to a separate, its own building where he can go out a door? Or what was your image then? Was it in a school?
Yeah. My image was that it was a school, but a school with a decent playground, making the most of whatever space was there with natural materials. Granted, it might not have great big trees, but something other than plastic.
Okay.
Okay. But yes, part of the school and part of the vision is the principal drops by and says hello during the mornings and is a friend of all of the parents.
Yeah. I'd say it was over 30 years ago that I did my student teaching in England. At the time, the youngest group started at age 4, but there was a nursery attached. And what you just described is what I saw over 30 years ago. And it was really nice, but there was no parking anywhere near a school. People didn't drive into the door. They had to walk a ways. There was carriages and strollers in the school entrances, not cars in parking lots, and there was lots of land. So we've got to really start thinking about that in terms of like our concept of how we think about families and, what's important. Is it important to have a parking lot, or is it important to have that for play space? For every child, every child in a child care center in Newfoundland requires 35 square feet of play space. That translates into, by 6, you have to have a parking lot outside for that. For every 200 square feet, a parking space is required on the land that we use for a child care center or any public building. The priority is parking lot versus, life for children, so anyway, that's my comment, but thank you.
Yes, and your comment, I would add, Bev, your comment reflects how absent the voice of early children has been from our entire concept of schooling in Newfoundland. Right? It's completely absent. Take St. Teresa's as an example. Finally, after 20 years, St. Teresa's is going to have a new school built. Top design, I'm sure. It's already over capacity. It's not even built, right? And early child care has not been factored into that at all. So, if part of the reason around pushing early learning into the ministries of education is to get them thinking that, when we're building sites, when we're building policy, when we're designing practices, we got to think the young children as well as the older children. There's a complete shift in thinking around what we mean by these schools.
So, actually, this new school, which is, I find really puzzling, but with all this work going on now, this thought around early years, I'm amazed that a new school would be designed and built right now. It's not ready to open yet. State of the art, like you say. There's no consideration even potentially for anything to do with younger age or that kind of a mindset of community college and such.
Most of the new schools around the St. John's area that have been built in the last number of years, when they open, they're already past capacity, right? Holy Family, Paradise. I mean, all of the population here, we know it's a reality here. The population is moving, is drifting. A couple of years ago, when I was in high school, when I was doing my student teaching, Cowan Heights and St. Matthews were the big, brand new schools coming. They're now half empty. And Paradise and Conception Bay South is the population hubs. But again, we need to get the policymakers to start thinking a much broader articulation of what space and place means for education.
I guess I have the mic, so I'll just add to that. Dave, it's funny you're bringing that topic up or raising that now. We run programs in schools within the city, and in one or two, actually two of our schools, one you just mentioned, which will be building, they've started to build a new school, and we've been assured that there's space in that school for our family resource programming. Now you're saying that it's already at capacity, and we're probably now at a point where we may lose that space. We have another school that's being constructed, and we're included in the blueprints in that too. So we could be at a capacity, at overcapacity there already. And we've experienced that in Torbay, where we were included in the blueprints, and before the school was even built, it was already at overcapacity. So where do we go with this in terms of with the Department of Education and that future planning around not only including early childhood programming, for whether it's for family resource programming, but now we're talking about adding on early childhood education in the form of daycare centers, etc. So we've got that commitment from principals within our system, but where do we go with it from there? And I don't know if you have the answer to that.
Well, I don't have the answer,
Yeah.
but it's part of the reason why we're starting this conversation. I mean, this conversation has to include these issues. The first thing to go, my experience is the first thing to go in a school that's at capacity is the cafeteria. Almost instantly being reassigned as the classroom. Then the library gets cut back. They won't close it. And then any other services such as yours are probably gone as fast as the cafeteria is gone, because they're not seen as being part of that service.
Yeah.
They're seen as completely separate luxuries, right?
So here we are now with the school, with the principal allowing us to do whatever programming we want to do in school. We may end up, we're being told we're going to be moving to that new school when it's ready to open, but already now we're trying to plan around the fact that we won't have space, so where do we go from here? That school we're currently in, that's closing. What's happening to that space?
Just whether this is helpful or not, but we ran into the same kind of problem at home, and we got turfed out of a school that we thought we had a great commitment to be in. And the lesson that we learned from that was the power of a contract. So while you're waiting for the system to recognize the importance of adding additional space for your programs, and especially if you're a family resource center that's got another source of funding, having a contract either with the school itself or the school board that guarantees you access to space might be something you could try, because all of a sudden that creates a legal commitment, and a little bit hard to get, but once you've got it, then at least you know that people are not going to write you out without talking to you.
Hi, as a grandmother, I'm just saying it would be ideal if I had a baby sister who was also able to go to the same daycare, because I think this is what's so hard. And particularly in this province, I know to get daycare for 2 and under is almost impossible. Most people register as soon as they find out they're pregnant, and they still may not get a place for their child. So it's really hit or miss. So it would be ideal if we could have more care for children that are under 2, and in places that there are care. This may be a very ideal request, but if they could have sleeping arrangements so that they would at least have a room that they could sleep in that's their own, because in most daycares they're grouped together. And for children under 2, as we know, sleep is a very important part of their development for their health and everything. So that's another ideal request like that.
Can I ask a question? If would your vision be different, and if yes, how? If this situation was in a community of 257 people, relatively remote, like Change Islands in Notre Dame Bay?
Yes, it would, but the service there would be designed by the people there. based upon the resources there and the need there. But the mom who goes to bed in Change Islands or Ramia at the end of her child's day should have as much comfort as the mom who goes to bed after her day was in an urban setting as well. That space, location should not compromise quality.
Just if I may, can I just follow on with that? I was going to ask you to just follow on. So looking at the experience of PEI, I mean, rural, fishing communities versus, Charlottetown, Summerside, how did that develop in taking those types of questions and needs?
In some ways, it's almost easier in rural parts of PEI because in those communities, they probably had schools when they had 50 kids, and now they're down to maybe 20 kids. So all of a sudden, you've got infrastructure. It's heated, it's cleaned, and the community doesn't want the school to close completely, so they're trying to find a way to repurpose it. So in some ways, in those rural communities, it's actually easier because they're dying to have somebody in. And if it's a nonprofit group or a community group or a for-profit group, somebody coming in to provide services to children in that building, it's so easy. Like, it's really easy as long as you can get the school boards on side. So it's actually in some ways better. The challenges that we have, and they're no different. I mean, we built in our city a new school. It doesn't have room in it for early childhood programming, but there's loads of space on the end of the building that can be added onto. Will they ever do it? I'm not sure, because 10 blocks away there's another school that's probably going to be completely empty. So from a community perspective, maybe we're better off to try to make the point that the program should go into that school that's going to be empty, but still have it connected somehow to the other school. So it's just a complicated thing depending on what your infrastructure looks like.
We heard an example yesterday, actually, of a school in the community here in Newfoundland right now. I'm not going to name the school because if they found out what they're doing, they'll close them down, I'm sure. It was a two-school community, and the population has drifted now down, so it's a K-12 school, and that's nearly empty. That school is now the library. It's the Family Resource Center. There's a daycare center there. It's a K-12 school. It's where all the after-school activities occur. So it's become the hub around which this community is surviving, right? And that's the town is a very small, isolated community who, through innovation, without even having the language, have created an integrated model, to respond to the unique needs of that community. And I'm certain that if the school board knew what was going on, they're violating about 50 policies, right?
So David, if I may, Jay, so where was the leadership for that?
The principal and the community, right? Innovation of idea.
And we can learn a lot from those examples, and that's what the demonstration sites at our foundation is all about doing. We don't do them to do nice things. We do them so that we can find out what are the practices that need to be scaled up, and do it in a way in partnership with governments, so we don't have to, they won't get closed down if we talk about it. The whole purpose is to talk about what are the things that need to happen, the small things often that need to be changed to allow that kind of innovation to be scaled up and not need exceptional leadership to happen in the first place. And that's, I think, really, really important. There are, I think, common design principles that we need public policies for, but then we need to be able to apply them to local contexts, be it urban or be it rural, be it coastal community, be it whatever, and that then to accommodate what's right around us. But doing the kinds of innovative things that the demonstration sites are doing that we support aren't entirely innovative. They're just allowed to talk about them now because that's part of the design.
Further comments, questions? Quiet group. What was in the soup? All right. Go ahead.
I just had a quick question. I'm just wondering, it's kind of off topic, but I'm wondering, is there anything that we could learn from the experience at Booth High School, where there was a daycare in the school? I know it's a different situation, but I was wondering if anything that came out of that maybe it can apply to here.
I'm not sure what happened with the high school, the daycare at Booth. Is it still in existence? It is? Yeah, I'm not familiar with it, so I can't comment on it. It's an infant center, okay. Okay. I do know that I spent a bit of time in Canada's north, and one of the things that first impact you on going through Nunavut is that every junior high has a daycare center built onto it, and they do it to improve attendance. Because in that culture, people parent much younger, and they know that it completely stops attendance. And it's an extremely successful model. And the impact is not just care for the children, but the education of the parents, the economic sustainability of the family, and on we go.
I was wondering, in terms of the integration of governance and in light of the experience in other provinces, does the choice of education help to serve minority language communities? For example, in PEI, does going through education make it easier, and the existence of Francophone school boards already make it easier to serve Francophones, or has Quebec faced any challenges by not going through education, serving Anglos, especially outside of Montreal?
Certainly on the PEI perspective, having it in the Department of Education has been really good for servicing minority language groups, and not just the Francophone community, but again, that intercity school with 13, 20 different languages, there's much easier access for the Department of Education to funds for translators and that kind of thing than there ever would be in social services. As much as I hate to say it, because my passion and my love and my working life with social services, education's got on a higher pecking order. Like, people are more prepared to support a program in education than they are exactly the same program in a social services department. So I think having it in education for us was really helpful.
Well, I mean, Quebec has a sharp distinction between Anglophone schools and Francophone schools, and that reaches down into their early childhood. There's some messiness because the early childhood isn't in education, so there's some toing and froing there. What's happened in New Brunswick, which is a bilingual province with parallel education, it's not the same, but it's parallel for Francophone and Anglophone, that's now reached down into early childhood. So the early childhood childcare intervention, preschool speech and language, family resource programs are going in parallel streams. And there's mixed feelings about it. Generally speaking, it's very welcomed by Francophone communities because the bilingual settings weren't bilingual, they were Anglo. And so the Francophone community, what I've understand, are much happier to have the parallel systems reach down all the way because it's in education.
So for me, it begins before the child gets to school, gets to the center, gets to wherever they're going. And it's about ensuring that all of the parents who want to have access to whatever site it is, wherever it is, have that opportunity. And that two bad options don't make a choice. So you have good options and they're accessible. And it doesn't matter if you're 16 with a child or 40 with a child. It doesn't matter if you have no money or you're rich. Doesn't matter if you're an immigrant or not, or a child with a disability or not, or Aboriginal child or not. That you have the opportunity, because I think we can create the most phenomenal centers, but if they are still not accessible, completely and totally inclusive and accessible, then we create a pathway for those who have. We've all done that already, so if we're going to do it this time, then we have to make sure that inclusion means inclusion. And that access does not just mean that a child can go into the center, but the lovely tree area you're just talking about, for example, they can't get to because they can't walk. Or there's not sufficient staff within with the correct training to address the needs of a child with a developmental disability, for example. And I think when we think access, we don't think widely enough. When we think inclusion, sometimes that comes, for me anyway, as someone who works in disability, often that comes with a tag of disability. But inclusion means that it doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, what you do, what your background, what your color, what your race, etc., that there's no unique defining factor.
Yeah, last night Margie McCain talked about the Child First Duty system and the demonstration site at Bruce Greenwood School as an example of an effective integrated setting. Kathy and I toured that school a couple of years ago, and in that school there's a family resource center, daycare, early learning centers, full day junior kindergarten, and on we go. And it's a K-6 school, I think. So me, 30 years in special education, I went in looking around, and the first thing I was looking for was, my kids, right? Where's the kids with autism? Where's the kids in chairs? Where's the behavior problem kids? Love them in particular. I could not find a child. I could not see a child who had an exceptionality because they were so seamlessly integrated and included into the structures of that day, right? There's a YouTube video on Bruce Greenwood School. Where can you find that?
If you Google Toronto First Duty, go down to the bottom of the page where it says video, and it plays there. So that's the best way. Yeah, no, and there were several designated kids in that group, as you found out later. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. We have to really work hard, make it explicit. Equality is not the same for everybody. Equity is not just opening the door. It's monitoring who's coming in the door and making sure some families will need extra efforts. All of those things need to be in place. And just as a school, ideally, and I think legally, last time I checked, has a responsibility to accommodate all kids, that has to be the same way with early childhood. And that's why I think we should really commend Manitoba and PEI for making it, there's a financial penalty. You don't get any public money if you don't accommodate kids with special needs. Not that it's a perfect world there, but that's a statement. That's a strong statement. And and I think we need to absolutely look at all of that and do a lot of work in that area and push it up into the school.
Can I add one quick thing? What excites me about reflecting on the visit to Bruce Greenwood School is that the child who starts attending that family resource center in his first year or her first year and moves through that system, by the time they hit grade 1, if there was an exceptionality there of any type, it would have been identified, responded to accordingly for at least 5 years. They will be a radically different child moving into our system. Right now, I have a private practice, as many of you know. Half the kids I see are grade 4 kids. This is a transition year. And the parents show up saying, my God, I wish I was here before now. But they said he's going to grow out of it, and he's actually growing into it. You know what I'm talking about. A child in Bruce Greenwood School, be it a speech-language issue or profound autism, by the time they hit grade 1, they will have had intervention individualized to them and their family for at least 5 years at that site. And then I'd be unemployed.
Okay. After Marie's comments, and Dave just took the wind out of my sails, because I was going to say, as chair of the Provincial Office for the Learning Disability Association, I was going to ask about early identification. We really need to work much, much harder on early identification, because children do go to the school system and they wait till they're really failing, not just a little bit, but like at least 2 years behind before they're identified, and then they're halfway through the elementary system. And some cases are much, much later. But there are many early signs and red flags to look out for in the early years, and lots of things can be done. While many disabilities are lifelong, there's lots that can be done in the way of intervention to make their outcomes much more positive.
Message never put me on the panel. But I come from the school of thought which says most of our understanding now of childhood disabilities is that they are lifelong constructs. I think that the vast majority of what we consider lifelong disabilities is because we're not identifying them until the child is 8, 9, 10, or 12 years of age, and by then they are lifelong constructs. If we were identifying them at age 1, 2, and 3, it would be a totally, totally different construct that we'd have around disability. Some of them are lifelong. That's not the issue. But even the lifelong severe or pervasive issues can be taken down to relatively mild, certainly moderate issues by the time a child hits the school system with early identification and intervention.
And I would just say I agree 100%. Remember that little chart that you couldn't read up on the wall? Some of those kids were the kids that you would think would be labeled as behavioral or children with special needs or whatever. And again, that early identification and a very deliberate way of working with the families and children in 10 months had a huge impact.
I just had a question about what people can do to encourage the government to overcome their hesitation or concerns about supporting early childhood education more. I mean, you mentioned that they didn't want to implement a test demonstration site, and I assume there are people in the government that know Newfoundland and Labrador lags behind the rest of the country in early childhood education, and I assume that money is always a factor. But what can ordinary people do to encourage the government?
Last panel of my life. Push this conversation. Politicians listen to their electorate base, right? We have to have, the whole reason we're here today is because we are starting a conversation, and we want you to push this conversation. It's not about money in Newfoundland, right? If it was about money, it wouldn't be happening in any of the other provinces because they have less money and less economic optimism than we do right now. It's about will and priorities. And this government has to be pushed by its population base to prioritize early child education. So the conversation starts today, but it's up to you how far it gets pushed out.
And what I would add to that is often provincial governments all over are able to walk away from the conversation and throw up their hands and say, well, you know, childcare wants this, family resource wants that, public health wants this, you guys go away and figure it out. And we manage to do ourselves in by not having some coming up with a common vision that we can get behind and move forward on. And then it becomes harder to dismiss us if we're not fighting each other.
And I would just add again, networks. If you have a government that really is interested in the economic agenda, having chambers of commerce on side, picking some of your big employers who are well respected by your current government, getting them on side in terms of the benefit that it will have for them in the future for a trained workforce. Like, think of everybody everywhere that you can imagine who might have an interest and a willingness then to kind of stand and be a part of it. It won't happen overnight, but you just have to keep communicating, and having a common plan, you're right, so that you know clearly what it is, and pick one or two things. Again, putting on my government hat, the best thing that would ever happen would be if a community group would come to you with a list of 12 things that they wanted to do, because nobody can do 12 things for one group. But if you pick one or two, it's an awful lot harder then for government to say no, because there's a very clear request coming from a whole lot of people for one or two things.
I guess I wanted to make a comment. I'm a developmental pediatrician here in St. John's, and what I've seen that really worries me over the last few years is certainly an increase in lack of ownership of issues. And I would highlight the recent changes in the Child, Youth and Family Services Act. So people that may not be familiar with the Newfoundland Act, basically there are some changes that really have made it firmer that Child, Youth and Family Services provide a protective mechanism rather than preventive mechanism. And so a lot of families that were able to get services and help, whether that was daycare or respite or other kinds of help with their children, unless there's actually been a physical or assault on the child now, they can't even avail of these services. And so what I see over and over is, even when there were little pockets of assistance for families, this is being eroded. And similarly in the school system, and I think Dave and a few other people have already talked about this, that, we won't assess these children until they're a certain age because, it's either not valid or they can get services anyway, so we won't bother. So what I would really like to see in an early education program for these children is that there be a holistic view of ownership of these children's issues, and that I think maybe one way to put it to the government or to the people that are going to pay for this is that this is a big hole that's not being filled anywhere else, and it's really important that the children that are accepted, are assessed early, that the interventions are available within the center. So we are fighting very hard to have more services in the school system. For example, there are no OTs in school systems in Newfoundland, and this is a really big need, and increase in speech language pathology. But right now in St. John's, there's a 2-year wait list to get to see a speech language pathologist in the system. So if you have a 2.5-year-old that's not talking, they won't get seen probably until just before they go to school. So I joke with my friends that they should get their fetuses on the wait list just in case they need the service. So there are huge holes, and I think that a really effective and inclusive early learning strategy is to make sure that these kids are assessed and things are picked up. I don't know what's happening right now in the daycares around town, but for a while there were these inclusion workers that really seemed to be picking up a lot of things in the daycare, and it was really obvious that things were being picked up. And for a while they actually had a pilot project where there was an OT going to the different daycares, and it made a world of difference because they could make interventions that actually made a difference at 2 or 3 rather than waiting until they're in school. And many times these things aren't going to be picked up at home, so it's really important that there are specialists, I think, in these centers that can do these kinds of assessments so that we're not getting kids in our clinic going to Kinderstart at the age of 5 with major issues that have never been identified. So I know that was a lot to say, but there was one other thing I wanted to say. I think it's gone out of my head now. But so I'm really excited that there is some appetite with the government to look at this, but I think someone needs to take ownership because it really is not being done right now. The other thing I wanted to say is I think if you look at proof about early intervention, I mean, I think you can really look at the ABA program with autism. I've never believed that there should be a program exclusively given to one diagnosis versus another. But because of the research and because of the numbers of kids with autism, the government did fund that. But there's a huge investment going into these kids, and I really think that that same kind of investment should be going into every child that needs it. And it's only to look at, their outcomes, because I'm seeing a totally different child at 9 now with autism than I did 10 years ago before we had early intervention. And it's really a shame that there's really very little research done that can prove that for other kids. There's research there, but it doesn't seem to be as, I guess, targeted. So I wish everyone luck with this, but I think it's very, very needed.
You'll bring that message back to your colleagues around the medical community. Talking about community health and navigation. So, ask is yours. All right, Kathy, do you have a question?
There's just a comment because I think this is a really important place where public health can be really involved and demonstrate a particular role in this. Canadian Pediatric Society recommends that all children have a developmental assessment done at 18 months. The newer literature is actually showing that. The newer literature is actually beginning to show that developmental assessment or screening of children should actually occur at a little bit of an earlier age, perhaps or even as early as 12 months of age. So I think, looking at some of these early centers, it's a wonderful place for someone with that experience, working with families, doing screening, and providing, anticipatory and directional guidance to parents, knowing the resources that are available, making the appropriate referrals, doing them through those sites. So, and that is something that public health nursing is actually already doing with all children with their child health needs.
And that was a component of the Toronto First Duty and the New Brunswick sites, is that public health came into the centers and loved it because the kid,
we continuously hear here in Newfoundland that the public health nurse is a wonderful resource to the family, and rightly so, without question they are. But what's missing is that they're the only resource available to the family. What's great about the Bruce Greenwood School, and building on Sandra's comments earlier, is that all the services go to that center, so that the family doesn't have to take the child. I got to pick the child up at 2 o'clock because he has an appointment with the pediatrician, and then I got to swing by the speech language pathology on the way home. It's all, as much as possible, it goes to that setting and supports the family there. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And actually, in some of the rural areas, the public health nurse is actually, her office is actually located in the community.
Yeah, and you know the results of that. I mean, more uptake, more knowledge, more continuity of service, and whatnot. Mm. 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 Which is part of what reason why we want integrated governance, so that it's all, right now there's 3 systems of governance in Newfoundland. There's health pieces, there's child, youth and family service pieces, and there's education pieces. If we could have it managed and streamlined more effectively, then it can be accessed more uniformly.
I guess I want to start with saying I agree with all the statements around early intervention and getting children seen and identified as early as possible. But I just wanted to, I guess, add the daybreak perspective, which would be that we learned many, many years ago that if you want to make a change in a child's life, then you also got to be very involved with the family. So if you have children who are growing up in socioeconomic disadvantages, then if you're not reaching out to the family, so I love the idea of a center that's inclusive to all the needs of the children, but also if you have a mom who's living in poverty, then have someone on site who's going to help mom with her housing issues, with her income issues, with food. We know food security is a huge issue in this province. As you know, safe, affordable housing is more an issue in St. John's now than it has ever been. I mean, where people lived in St. John's 20 years ago, which was our slum housing, is now, you know, the most expensive housing in the city. So families are finding it increasingly difficult to find places to live. We have moms now in the city, moms and dads with mental health issues and addiction issues that are probably the highest that we've ever seen in our population. So again, these are kids who it's great to have them go to an early learning center during the day because we know we're going to have qualified and services available to them. But if you don't provide those services to mom and the family when they get home, then we're not making the change that this child's truly going to need to be, you know, at their optimal development when they get to school.
Verna or James, any experience that you could bring, you know, on that particular question?
Sure. So from the PEI perspective, one of the programs that we're really proud of is a program called Best Start. And it was funded originally by the federal government through the Justice Center. And the whole idea of it at the time that it began was that if you could identify babies as soon as they're born in high-risk situations and start to work with the families, then theoretically you should be able to help those children and therefore reduce criminal activity and the draw on the justice system later on. So that started on PEI. The federal government pulled out. The provincial government, thank heavens, carried the funding on. And it's at the point now where every baby that's born in PEI is screened by public health nursing within 24 or 48 hours of being born. And if there are any risk factors that show up in the screening, the family is offered an in-home visiting program where a qualified person goes in for an hour every week to work with the mom, the dad, and the child in terms of development, health. Once they get the basics over with in terms of infant care, what they're discovering is that then mom starts to want to think about going back to school, or dad wants to start to think about dealing with alcoholism or whatever the issues are. That in-home visiting component has become absolutely critical in terms of making a difference, and it is making a difference for those families. Not for everyone. because there are some families where, especially if the child protection situations are very volatile, you can't have necessarily a best start worker going into the home. But for a huge number of families, it's making that big difference in terms of supporting mom and dad. Because you're right, children don't raise themselves. They're actually in a home, and the best thing you can do is work within the home and family. And then that continues through with the other programs that the nonprofit Chances operates. Once you get involved in any one of the programs in that organization, you're automatically included in parenting programs, counseling programs, anything that's available, you're automatically a part of. So it's a whole wraparound.
Yeah, and that is the goal of what's happening now at Chances, and that our foundation is supporting, is really removing the boundaries between those programs, so they're much more integrated with each other. It's much more common that the home visitor will take the parent and a couple of children to the CAPC program, and and then get the mother going on a regular basis, or into the early years center if she wants to go back to work. So there's a seamlessness that goes back and forth, and they're actually using the early learning framework that was designed specifically for the early years centers, but they're using it in the home visiting as the basis for the pedagogy they bring and so forth. So it's about making it an integrated program delivery platform that includes the early intervention, family supports that not all families will need, but many will take some of, and to normalize them. So that all parents need help some of the time. I mean, there might be somebody here who's a saint and perfect, an angel, who had a child and never felt a moment of insecurity about what they're doing. I suspect you're lying. So, you know, all parents need help some of the time. Some parents need help more of the time. But some of us need doctors a lot, some of us a little. It's not stigmatizing. But why should it be for other things? And by making this normalized, that parenting supports become normalized, and so I think it's very, very helpful. Unfortunately, in Ontario, our home visiting program, there's many excellent examples, but too much of it is stigmatized, and families see it as something to avoid because you're just bringing the aid in, children's aid, child welfare. They're the other, and you don't have this great relationship that's you see at Chances.
Can I just add quickly? One of the things that impacted me around the visit to the Bruce Greenwood School, the Family Resource Center had as many nannies coming as parents. Now, in a large city like Toronto, you can understand that, but in our economy, we're seeing more and more of that. We're seeing more and more professionalized home care providers who also need support. Right? And I think one of the sound bites that Marie and I tried to put into the discussion paper was that effective early child education is individualized early child education. Right? And that's a critical piece we need to keep in our minds.
Any other comments? I just had one. Thanks, time. We're going over this session, but that's fine. The interface between early childhood education in terms of our use of it, in terms of the land context. Anyway, we have both nonprofit, we have for-profit operators. We have now obviously the school board now running a big system. That interface, how should it work? How could it work to move this agenda along? Bernard? From your experience.
I think it really helps to have one department responsible. And I know we talked about that, Jane did, in terms of governance. It sounds really simple, but it's not. If you have one department of government that is theoretically responsible for the whole range, then eventually, through time, one would imagine that the importance and the role of the early childhood people will start to integrate and become seamless with the role of the people in the regular school system and high school. And I think that does actually happen, if that's kind of what you're getting at. I do believe that we are at the point now in PEI where early childhood is seen as more of an education rather than a child care looking after. I think there have been great strides made in terms of doing joint professional development. In that demonstration project in Prince Street School, it was amazing starting off because the teachers at first had no use for play-based curriculum. And they thought this business of assessing children using the EYE was just a colossal waste of time. And by the end of the year, we were discovering that the teachers in the school system were starting to come to the early childhood educators saying, you know, I've got this challenging behavior with one of my students. You know, is there anything in your experience that I could be doing that would be different? So they're actually starting to work together, and co-location and having a common employer may help a bit.
Well, I guess that will now bring this session to an end unless there's anything else. So I want to thank our three both speakers and now panelists for their contributions and the discussion this afternoon. And then they can move when they're ready. Now what we're going to do